Good afternoon and welcome to the 25th hour, helping you stay on top of the 24/7 news cycle. I'm Dennis Futoryan. This week we have a special guest, ACLU Board President Deborah Archer. Deborah was elected to become the first Black ACLU Board President in January this year. A child of Jamaican immigrants, Deborah was born in 1971 in Connecticut. She earned her bachelor's in government from Smith College and her law degree from Yale in 1996, having clerked for a federal district judge, Alvin Thompson, and later worked as a legal fellow at the ACLU. Deborah Archer's resume only becomes more impressive as she became an assistant counsel at the NAACP, an associate at Simpson Thacher and Bartlett, the first dean of diversity and inclusion at New York Law School, where she also led the Racial Justice Project and Impact Center, and is now a professor at NYU. If that wasn't enough, she also sits on the board of the New York Civil Liberties Union, Legal Aid, and the National Center for Law and Economic Justice. I could be here all day listing off her accomplishments, so here's the conversation. Professor Deborah Archer, Board President of the ACLU, thank you so much for joining us this morning at the time of this recording.
Thank you for having me.
So the first question I want to ask you, Deborah, is what does the ACLU Board President do? Very simple question.
Yeah, a simple question with, I guess, not a simple answer because there's so many things. But my primary responsibility as president is to lead the National Board of Directors of the ACLU. And the board's a complicated board, looks very different, I think, from normal boards that you're used to seeing. The board has a representative from every state affiliate and then additional at-large members from around the country who all come together to fulfill all of the traditional fiduciary obligations of a board. But unlike other organizations, the board is also responsible for setting policy and direction for the entire organization on all of the civil rights, civil liberties issues that we work on. And this includes like our position on the Second Amendment or the filibuster or reparations or immigration. And finally, the executive director, Anthony and Romero, and I work closely and really in partnership to help lead the organization. So it's an incredible opportunity to help shape the direction of the ACLU and also to have a real impact on civil liberties and civil rights.
And so how many board members are there? That's at least 50, right? And then you said at large. So how many?
About 60 board members.
Wow. That must be a large conference table.
It's a large conference table. It is robust discussions. So, one of the biggest jobs I have, I think, is actually managing our board meetings and facilitating that conversation in a way that everyone feels included, but also that takes advantage of the unique qualities of that kind of board, having someone from Iowa and someone from Maine and someone from Louisiana and folks from California, all sitting at a table, figuring out what are the core values and civil liberties issues, what positions we should take, and to make sure that I manage our meetings in a way that really takes advantage of that opportunity to have perspectives from around the country come together to shape direction is important.
Is it difficult trying to figure out a way to bridge gaps between regional differences? I mean, one would think that if you're on the ACLU board, there's a meeting of the minds, so to speak, right? Nobody's that vastly different. I mean, I'm not sure, right? I'm not on the board, but how is it bridging those regional divides?
Yeah, so some of it is at the core, the fundamental rights are fundamental rights. And I think more of the discussion and challenge around regional issues is in how we move forward in the work that we do, how we describe the work that we do, the narrative that we use, the strategies that we use. The environment is different in New York City around civil rights and civil liberties issues than it is in other parts of the country. And so we have to take that into consideration.
Are we a little less patient than your more rural counterparts?
we're sometimes folks are on the front lines of some of these battles. And so we have to keep that in mind in how we move the work forward, and moving together as an organization, a nationwide organization can be a challenge. So I'm pulling in all of my facilitation and mediation and moderation skills that I use often as a professor, and I use often in other areas of my life. I was chair of the New York City Civilian Hate Review Board, and it's a board that I think in many ways is similar to the ACLU board in that it's bringing together people with a wide range of perspectives We are accountable to lots of different constituents. That was true when I ran the CCRB. And people feel very passionate about the issues that the CCRB addresses, as well as the ACLU. So I'm drawing on a lot of those skills as well.
And you took over from Maya Wiley, as I read, right? And she's running for mayor right now. So how did,
Yeah.
so,
I was acting chair before Maya Wiley and then after Maya Wiley.
okay, there you go. So, it's really admirable that you've I mean, your experience is breathtaking. I'm not saying that just to say it. It's a very stellar resume. And you're also the first Black board president of the ACLU. So how did it feel coming on board? Did you feel a sense of pride? What were your thoughts in the moment that you were told that you became the first Black board
Yeah.
president?
I had those thoughts in the moment, but also leading up to it. I think first, the significance of being the first person of color to serve in this role is really not lost on me at all. But to put it in context, in over 100 years, the ACLU has had only 7 other presidents. So I'm just the 8th. But presidents have historically served for very long periods of time. The president right before me served for 13 years, and the president before her served for 17 years.
No term limits there?
No term. So, I hope to be around for a long time. But of course, there's still a big part of me and others that are frustrated that in 2021, we're still tackling so many firsts for Black people and people of color. But it really, in the end, doesn't change the fact that I am incredibly proud to be a part of that history for the ACLU and in the broader community. And I think that pointing out how many firsts we're still achieving or have yet to achieve can help to challenge this erroneous narrative that we hear so often, that we're living in a post-racial society where we have achieved this sense of equity and true inclusion. So the fact that we're still talking about first Black anything is proof of the work that we need to do, and that the work to advance racial justice is still really vital and urgent. And I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, you always hear people say, in reaction to certain events in the news, saying, "Look, this is the 21st century. How are we still dealing with this?" And it's been a reckoning. I would say, even 21 years into the 21st century.
Yeah, and the ACLU, as I said, has been around for over 100 years, and my election, I think, adds another dimension to the story of the ACLU. That I don't think many people are aware of, and I hope that my election will help more people feel and believe that the ACLU represents all of America, that we're reflected in the ACLU. I've always felt that since I worked there in the 1990s, but many other people haven't felt that themselves. But we're now an organization where 60% of the members of the National Board of Directors identify as people of color. Our executive director, Anthony Romero, is an openly gay Latino. And across the country, our affiliates are led by an incredible and diverse group of leaders. About 40% of our affiliate leaders are people of color. So I hope that after my election, more people will see themselves in the ACLU and look at us as the diverse organization that we really are.
And did that change in the demographics of the leadership? Did that happen gradually, or is it a more recent phenomenon, especially in light of Trump's election and everything like that? So how did that come to be?
No, I think that was a gradual change. It's a gradual change to increase diversity and inclusion among our staff, among our lay leadership. It's the result of at least decade of work focused on expanding our reach and being more inclusive to people who traditionally have not come to the ACLU. I spent some time as the ACLU's National Affirmative Action Officer for the Board of Directors. And so in that role, I participated in and saw the work that we were doing to become a more diverse and inclusive organization over the last decade. So I really do think that it is the result of hard work of the ACLU trying to live up to its values each and every day.
And you have said before in interviews and in articles that racial justice is now going to be at the forefront of the ACLU's priorities. Can you talk a little bit about what the ACLU is doing in terms of racial justice now?
Yeah, and I do want to say that we have been doing racial justice work since our founding.
Hmm.
Um, and Thurgood Marshall was a member of our board decades ago, of course. And when I was a fellow with the National Office of the ACLU in 1997, I was there doing racial justice work. So it's always been a part of who we are. But
Hmm.
yeah, we are deepening and expanding our racial justice work through our systemic equality initiative. And in doing this work, we're really using all of the advocacy tools in our toolbox and pulling on all of the levers we have available to us. And that, of course, includes litigation, but it also includes policy work and legislative advocacy, public education, and narrative work to shift how we talk about systemic equality issues. And it also means that we're shifting our resources to parts of the country that are on the front lines of this battle for racial justice.
Are you prioritizing focusing on Congress or going state by state?
Yeah, I can take a step back and talk about what our systemic equality initiative really is. But the broad picture is yes, that it is a nationwide focus, but also certainly in partnership with our state affiliates to make sure that we have an agenda that is both focused nationwide, but also on the needs of particular states. And so
Hmm.
in February, we launched this systemic equality initiative, and it's a comprehensive racial justice agenda that's focused on eradicating the vestiges of colonialization, slavery, and Jim Crow, trying to identify and challenge the modern tools of racial inequality, and also prioritizing social, political, and economic equality. And there are a few buckets to the work. We are working on areas that help us to reconcile the past, addressing the scars that were created by hundreds of years of chattel slavery and Jim Crow and racially discriminatory government policies layered on top of that. And here the work includes advancing the conversation around reparations, challenging laws that perpetuate inequality, particularly around housing, education, and the criminal legal system. We're trying to extend empowerment, which means looking to challenge the barriers to full participation in our democratic process that undermine the rights of primarily Black and Brown voters to participate in our political process. And this includes protecting and expanding the right to vote, focused on ensuring fair redistricting processes.
Hmm.
Right now, in addition to the notorious legislation in Georgia, we've
Yeah.
seen almost 400 voter suppression bills in 47 states.
Hmm.
And beyond kind of defensive work, we're exploring affirmative efforts to expand the franchise. And then finally, I'll mention we're working to build prosperity.
Mm.
The gaps in wealth between Black and white households really exposes accumulated inequality and discrimination, as well as differences in power and opportunity that can be traced back to this nation's inception. So our policies there include canceling public student debt, accessing financial services through postal banking for the underbanked. We're trying to level the playing field. So that includes expanding high-speed internet access, affirmatively furthering fair housing and challenging housing segregation, eliminating barriers to reentry for returning citizens, and also a focus on ending algorithmic bias. So it really is a comprehensive
Simple, all simple stuff.
simple stuff you should be able to solve tomorrow. No, the stuff that's been plaguing us for, in some cases, decades, in other cases, centuries, and trying to do work and using our resources and knowledge and our nationwide structure to try to move the needle a little bit closer towards equality.
And how confident is the ACLU feeling right now? I mean, you've mentioned a lot of stuff that is very common sense. Again, we are dealing with this in the 21st century. Come on now, right? And yet we are seeing significant pushback from the Republican Party, but not just them, but also from moderate Democratic senators like Joe Manchin, Krista Sinema, who are leading this obstacle, I would say, to reforming the filibuster, even a little bit to let in civil rights causes past
Mhm.
the Senate. And so I wanted to ask how confident the ACLU is feeling right now. I know that Biden is president now, but the Democratic control of all three, well, not all three branches, but in the executive branch and the legislative branch is very fragile. And I think a lot, yeah, I mean, you hear news stories now, progressives are starting to like lose their cool about negotiations when it comes to infrastructure. So can you talk a little bit about how the ACLU is feeling in terms of confidence in passing its agenda?
I would say never confident, but always hopeful and optimistic
Hmm.
that the work we're going to do is going to affect meaningful change. I think we deeply believe in the transformational power of integrated advocacy. So when you pull together litigation and public education and legislative advocacy and narrative change and all of those pieces of the work and the threads that we of the work that we do, I think we're hopeful and optimistic that we actually can see change. I don't know that we're surprised by the reaction. I think that's the nature of progress, that progress is always met with retrenchment, particularly around civil rights and civil liberties issues. We always see 2 steps forward and 1 step back, sometimes 2 steps forward and 2 steps back. It's what we're seeing now, a response and reaction to the progress, the demonstration of power in communities that we've seen in the past year or so. We're seeing a response to that. We're seeing a response to some of the steps we've seen in the past decade to expand and deepen the protections of civil rights and civil liberties. We're seeing reactions to that now. We're seeing reactions to challenges to privilege
Hmm.
and the desire to spread opportunity more equally.
Hmm.
And so I don't think I'm surprised that we're seeing this retrenchment. I think we push forward regardless.
And how would you maybe give advice to listeners who try to reach out to people who have become so ingrained in their own ideological silos, racial silos, that this work is really important because we're getting a lot of knee-jerk reactions from, you know,
Mhm.
whether it's no fault of their own, people who might watch Fox News, but now Newsmax, OAN, who, you know, listen all day to things about critical race theory, you know, and run with, you know, maybe the more negative aspects of, for example, George Floyd's late life, you know, despite him turning it around at the end and battling his demons. How would you, and if there's an example from your personal life on you talking to somebody from the other side, basically, how would you bridge that divide? What would you say to that person to maybe get on the same page as you that the work is important?
Yeah, I think that's all depends on the issue, the specific tactics that you use. But I think just being relentless in
Mm,
continuing the conversation, providing the information. You might remember this from uh, law school,
hmm.
that often when we're writing as lawyers, we tell our students, don't tell me, show me. Right? Don't just tell me what the conclusion is that I should reach. Help me get to that point. Help me understand why that's important. And I think that's important for at least some segment of folks who are fighting for civil rights and civil liberties to be able to show the history, to show how we got from point A to point B, to show the impact that it has on individuals and communities, and then to tie that to the core principles of this country, the rights and privilege that we all believe in. And so I do think a lot of it is about constant education and information to counter misinformation, to make sure that we are flooding um, our communities with the information that they need to be powerful advocates on behalf of themselves. So it's really complicated and ongoing and tiring, but
Yeah.
critically important to continue to have these conversations over and over again and to share the information that we have to be a resource.
Do you have a memory of trying to talk to somebody about this stuff? Try to get them, closer to the
Mhm.
middle or closer to your side of things?
I have those conversations all the time.
Mm-hmm.
As a professor, every year I'm engaged with a broad spectrum of students,
Mm-hmm.
and a broad spectrum of students find their way into my classrooms,
Mm-hmm.
into my office, and I have those conversations all of the time. And I'm sure, as you can imagine, people reach out to me um, often to say that they agree with the work that the ACLU is doing and want to support, but also to say that they disagree,
Mm-hmm.
passionately disagree, and want to engage me in conversations about why what the work what the ACLU is doing is wrong or destructive. And it's an opportunity, if they're willing to listen, for me to have those conversations. But it's important, one, that the other person on the other side is willing to listen. I've engaged in lots of conversations where the person's not open to the conversation, they don't want to hear, or where conversations are not productive because we don't agree on fundamental principles. We don't agree on the importance of equality. We don't agree on my right to exist and have access to opportunity. And so it's hard to have a conversation when someone doesn't accept my fundamental humanity. And as far
Right,
as
right. Yeah.
that's the basis of a productive conversation.
And in terms of, I mean, compromises are also part of these everyday conversations, and especially if you're trying to achieve something in Congress, right? So we're looking at the George Floyd Act, and Jim Clyburn in the House said that he's okay with not having an end to qualified immunity as part of that
Mhm,
legislation. So, what's your reaction to something
mhm.
like that? Would you or the ACLU be okay with the qualified immunity not being reformed as part of the George Floyd Act?
I'm going to speak for myself that I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes change is transformational, and we welcome when change is transformational, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes change is incremental. And it's, people on the ground in those situations have to make judgment calls about where we're able to move forward, how, when, and at what pace. My hope is always that we can achieve that transformational change. But as a lawyer, I think we have embraced, to a certain extent, a transformational change, because the law is, incremental change, because the law is often about incremental change.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I see the value in both. I see the value in both in the context of policing, and I see the value in both in every civil right or civil liberties challenge we face. Um, there's benefit in eliminating some harm as soon as we can, while we still work for the
Mm-hmm.
transformational change that we know that we are entitled to and that we deserve.
And is that what you would say to progressive activists who are just like gunning for, a snap of the fingers, basically, in that
No,
sense?
I wouldn't. I would say that it's good that there are people out there who are fighting
Mm-hmm.
every day for that transformational change, who are pushing big, grand visions about what justice means and about what equality means. And so I wouldn't ask them to pull back at all. I think we need many
Mm-hmm.
different kinds of advocates
Mm-hmm.
pushing for many different kinds of change all at the same time. And I wish
So,
them the best of luck to achieving that transformational change.
I like this dichotomy of the lawyer trying to fix these problems, but then as a person, as a human being, as an American trying to fix these problems.
Mhm.
And one of the things I want to ask you is, I can't go to a courtroom and, tell the judge what happened in my own personal life to try and, you know, get a favorable decision in my client's favor. However, in your capacity, you can draw from those experiences from your early life, and you
Mhm.
have, and you've mentioned times when the word KKK was
Mhm.
spray painted on your house and your car as a child,
Mhm.
and not that it was your house and your car, right? It was your parents' house and your parents' car, but and you were slipped a derogatory note under your dorm door, right? If I have that correctly, with the N word on it.
Mhm.
Is there anything from your adult life that you can draw on that fuels your fight for change? That anything that happened recently? I was talking recently to Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA candidate, and these experiences with racism, just they do not stop. For one, it's just I'm uh, admired at the fact that you carry on with all of these, you know, serious incidences. For the Jewish community where I'm from, also we've experienced that's a whole can of worms that we could talk about all day. But the main question is there anything that happened recently that you can draw on?
Yeah, I think as a Black person in America, yes, every day, big and small.
Mm-hmm.
And literally, I mean, just about every day I can point to something. Recently I was walking through Washington Square Park and was called the N-word. It's, the challenges of navigating the public education system in New York City, I think reflects deep systemic racism as well as explicit biases. To the fear I feel every time my teenage sons walk out the door. My relative privilege certainly helps me navigate racism, from microaggressions to individual bias to systemic racism, more easily and readily than others can. But it's still all there. And it's a constant reminder of how much work we still have left to do.
Did you have the talk with your children in terms of how to navigate racism through this world?
I have the talk with them constantly. I'm sure you can imagine, given my interest and experience with the racial justice advocacy work, my role at the ACLU, kind of work and teaching I do at NYU Law School, that it is a constant conversation in this house. And that includes how that they navigate the world as young Black men in the United States. There are things that they should know, things that they should understand, and unfortunately ways that they have to adjust their behavior. It's hard when your kids are young to tell them, I know that that's what your friends are doing, but there's a reason why you can't do that, or why if you do that, you have to be more careful. And so I've had many conversations with my sons. I would say some of the more challenging conversations have happened over this past year, trying to balance how much they're exposed to. I want them to know what's going on in the world, to understand, again, how it impacts their lives, the lives of others in their community. But they're also kids, and I want to protect their childhood and not have them be constantly traumatized every day about what's being shown on television or in the news. I also want to model resiliency for them, to be strong and show them how we fight back and how we respond to what can feel like a constant daily barrage of discrimination and attacks. But at the same time, sometimes I get worn down by the constant beat of racism and inequality, and it's hard to show them strength that I want to.
I can see nobody's going to beat you down, Deborah. Don't worry about it. Nobody's going to beat you down. Just keep doing the work you're doing. I want to switch gears a little bit and ask you about, obviously, if you're racist, you will fight tooth and nail against the change that you are working on. Okay. But in the past couple of days, the New York Times published a story that shows the internal dialogue happening within the ACLU about, some feeling that the fight for racial justice that the organization is taking up is making the First Amendment fights that the ACLU is maybe known for, and putting it on a lower priority. So what would you say to those people who feel like the First Amendment fights are being deprioritized?
Yeah. I would say that it's simply not true that our work on the First Amendment is being is not a priority. It's been constant, and we have been extremely busy, particularly in this last year, responding to just really blatant attacks on First Amendment in terms of restrictions on people's ability to protest and have their voices heard. You mentioned the attacks on what people are calling critical race theory, which really is, in most cases, misusing this legal framework to talk about and challenge the way that we are discussing race. There are just profound challenges to the First Amendment, and that we are there in that fight to protect the First Amendment. I think the ACLU does not exist in a vacuum. The debates that are happening outside of the organization are also taking place inside of the organization, and that's a good thing. It's a healthy thing. I'm really proud of the robust dialogue we have as an organization about our work and our strategies. And I don't take any of that as a reflection of a lack of commitment to our core principles.
The healthy bit of schizophrenia happening at the ACLU. So
yeah, it's hard, right? To be this kind of organization. We believe that fighting for freedom and fighting for equality go hand in hand. They're two sides to the same coin. And the contours of our work in these areas will change and have changed as society changes, but the commitment to both remains strong. We are an organization that's trying to defend and protect all of the Bill of Rights and the Reconstruction Amendments. And so that's challenging, and it leads to lots of interesting conversations and questions about the work we do and how we do that work. But at the bottom line is we remain committed to all of it.
So do you think the Times report is a little overblown in terms of what it's what case it's trying to put forward?
I think it didn't accurately reflect the First Amendment work that is going on today, that has continually gone on. I think it did not accurately reflect that racial justice work has always been important to our work. As I said, I did that work when I was at the ACLU in 1997. And I also worked on First Amendment work when I was there at the ACLU in 1997. And there were, at that point, questions and conversations and debates going on about how we move forward and all the work that we do.
Take that, New York Times.
So I think, it's a conversation that I've been a part of literally my entire professional career, as I've always been and remain committed to, again, to the principles of equality and the principles of freedom.
And when Susan Herman was in charge, your predecessor, she sued the Trump administration, I think it was at least 413 times or something like that. And we're talking a lot about the work that the ACLU is doing. So has the ACLU sued the Biden administration yet for anything, or is there anything in the works? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I think we are in litigation with the Biden administration, certainly because they have been substituted into ongoing litigation that we had against the Trump administration. And we're engaged in conversations and negotiations with the Biden administration on lots of important issues, particularly around immigration. I think that President Biden's mandate isn't just to undo damage of the various crises that he inherited or some of the toxic policies of the Trump administration. It is to work towards a country that heralds justice and fairness and equality for all of us. And we're going to do the work to make sure that he and the members of his administration fulfill that obligation. And if that is litigation, then it will be litigation. If it's not ideal to litigate. We hope to achieve change more quickly. Sometimes litigation can take a long time, but it is a tool we have and that we won't hesitate to use. But we're also engaged in helping to make sure that their legislative agenda reflects that commitment to protecting civil rights and civil liberties, that they're advancing policies within their agencies that respect, protect civil rights and civil liberties. So we are actively engaged in trying to make sure that the Biden administration lives up to its obligations.
Mr. President, while you're there in Europe, you have been put on notice by Deborah Archer. I think he totally knows what's going on, and
yes,
he's.
I hope so. I hope everyone knows.
He doesn't want an ACLU summons and complaint happening, and so now we don't have a lot of time left, Deborah, and so I want to. There's plenty of other things I could be asking you. What are you keeping an eye on in the immediate future that you think our listeners should also be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think you mentioned throughout this conversation, the things that I'm also keeping an eye on. And the first is the Biden infrastructure plan that you mentioned. It could really be transformative because it potentially represents an historic investment in urban communities and communities of color, investments in transportation and schools and water, things that are critically important factors in the ability of communities and people to thrive and to be healthy and to be happy. It's also an important opportunity to ensure that this type of investment is distributed in a way that's going to address the racial inequalities that are built into our transportation system and our transportation infrastructure, and to correct those harms. And then you mentioned that there's an actual battle, I think, for the soul of democracy happening in DC right now with the filibuster and the efforts to fix the Voting Rights Act and to protect the right to vote. The filibuster may sound like a technical rule and it may not get folks very excited, but right now people are using this Senate rule, which has its origins in white supremacy, to further entrench white supremacy. And around the country, states are making it easier to overturn the will of the people. If those in power don't like the way the people are voting, they're making it easier to deny the right of people of color and people from other marginalized communities to participate in our political system. And because of the filibuster, it's not clear that Congress is going to do anything about it. And I think this is really the story right now. This democracy is based on the right to vote. And that right is under threat now in a way that we haven't seen in decades, really.
If I think this could be my last question to you, if Joe Manchin walks into your elevator and you only have a minute, what would you say to him?
I think I would repeat just what I said. It is important to understand the urgency of the threat that our democracy faces and the way that these tools are being used to aid that threat. We could lose our democracy, and it won't happen overnight. It happens little by little. We pick away at the things that are fundamental to democracy, and we have to start to fight to protect right now, not a year from now or 2 years from now or 5 years from now when it's too late.
Deborah Archer, Board President of the American Civil Liberties Union, thank you so much for taking a few minutes of your time this morning to talk to me and to talk to our listeners here at the 25th hour. I really appreciate it.
Thank you again for having me.
And that's it for this week's show of the 25th Hour, helping you stay on top of the 24/7 news cycle. Don't forget to rate us on Apple Podcasts, share us with your friends, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can email your tips and suggestions at the25thhournews@gmail.com and become a patron today for as low as $2 a month to support the show at patreon.com/the25thhournews. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.